Yeah, we're going to dig into a fun topic, probably one of the most fun topics that I get to talk about, and that's cyber threats and prevention going into this year. We typically address this just about every year, saying, hey, what do we see coming and how are we going to defend against it, knowing what we know today? So I do like to start off any cybersecurity conversation just around why we talk about this so much. And if we were all sitting in a room, I would say, hey, let's raise our hands if you've gotten a letter from your healthcare provider or a financial institution saying, oops, we've accidentally released your data or somebody has come into our environment and taken it. And we're sorry about that. Here's some credit monitoring, here's some information. Yeah, I like thank you, Sarah, for raising your hand. I appreciate that. We all probably get that. And it makes us feel uncomfortable, makes us feel nervous. After the 10th one, we kind of get a little numb to it. But what Apex and Mike and our team has to see is the flip side of that. It's the companies that have to send those letters out. Maybe not those specific letters, but they have to notify their team or their clients or their vendor that they had a breach. And they're not sure if their business is going to be open in a month, how it's going to impact their reputation, their teams, their financials, all those things. We see that stress. And that's why we get kind of passionate about talking about the threats and how we can prevent against them, because we don't want companies to have to be the ones saying, I had this happen. Money side of it is always the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. We can talk about a lot of different money terms, but it's really that emotional stress and that business stress that we're trying to avoid. So a couple terms, we'll have just a couple slides here of just talking through kind of setting the table a little bit for the conversation, because we use a few different terms when we're talking about attacks. So cybersecurity events, right? And I'm kind of using two of them already. So we have attack, event, incident, and breach. And you may use these interchangeably. You may have heard them used interchangeably, but from a technical perspective, these have specific meaning. So first things first, attacks are just the attempt to bypass security. It's all the billions of phishing emails that go out every day, all of the scanning and trying to find ways in. It's just the attempt to bypass it. And we see a lot of them. The good news is, with the solutions we have in place, we get to defend against the vast majority, 99+% of those attacks. Now, if that attack bypasses the technology meant to stop it, we either call that an event or an incident. The simple definition between those two are events are automatically healed, right, through the solutions or through the software. An incident requires a person to get involved for the remediation. Now, we do this differentiation because a lot of compliance-driven organizations have to document when people are involved to solve problems to make sure it's complete and it's fixed and all that good stuff. Then we get to the bad word, breach. Now, we typically won't use that word unless someone with a law degree or a badge tells us that we absolutely have to. But that just means the bad actors have gotten to the data. They've taken it, they've modified it, deleted it, they've done something to it. We get that breach term. But just understanding the difference between incident and breach. Incident means they got into the environment, breach means they got to the data. And one of the challenges we have in today's world is identifying that they actually got to the data. Because if I'm a bad actor and I break into one of your environments, whether I get to the data or not, I'm sure going to tell you that I got to the data. Now, if I can ransom it, if I can do other things, right, you'll see the ramifications of that. But if I'm trying to extort you, I'll say that I got your most sensitive data and I'm going to release it. We want to be able to prove that difference there. Kind of the big obvious piece of that is just trying to prove the difference, right? The second set of, I guess, words that we're trying to really define here are how the bad actors are getting paid. And we typically look at that in four ways: ransom, extortion, impersonation, and data sale. Now, simply put, ransom is just you have to pay the bad actors to restore access to your environment. That could be decrypting the environment or pushing the data back into the environment, making the backups work again when they've been shut off. Extortion means we're going to have to pay the bad actors not to release the information. Impersonation is really a method of trying to act like an internal employee or a trusted external vendor or client to try to get money to move in a specific location. And then data sale. Data sale really has very little to do with us. If I get really good, juicy information from you, I'm going to try to sell that to the highest bidder. And this can be a lot of times medical records or financial information. Now, a quick story, and we'll go through this pretty fast. I'm from the MSP industry, just like Mike, and we're telling this story just to kind of give you an idea of a theory people have. So we'll see if it holds true as we get through the conversation. Got called into an environment that had been breached. They knew they were breached. They knew they had an issue, but they weren't quite sure what happened. We went as an MSP and said, well, let's just discover what's going on. Found out they had very little security, pretty minimal, even for today's standards. And this is 2 or 3 years ago at this point. No multi-factor authentication, shared passwords, all this stuff that we preach against constantly. But this company had decided to do that, and we weren't there to solve that specific problem. We were there to get the bad actors out. After a little bit of investigation, we found out they had a business email compromise, meaning bad actors had got into their Microsoft 365 system because of their security or their lack of security, right? And redirected all of the payments from vendors and from clients to a new bank account. You've heard this before, CFO fraud, right? And ended up losing around $400,000. And this is how they noticed it, because they were calling their client saying, hey, are you going to pay us? And they're saying, I already did. I sent it to the new bank account just like you told me to. So we investigated to figure that out. Now, we jumped in, locked down the email environment, kicked the bad actors out, found out all the accounts and rules they created, and recreated the environment in a proper fashion. And then went back to them and said, well, there's some things we need to do beyond just getting them out to protect you from the future. We really got to implement some better passwords. We got to do multi-factor authentication. We got to do all these solutions, endpoint detection, shift to a better backup solution so we can restore. Kind of gave them a complete list of solutions to solve it, but they turned down that proposal. And from their eyes, the bad actor was out, the risk was gone, and they were going to get back to business. We were kind of surprised with that, but we weren't surprised when we got a call 2 weeks later, right? Saying, hey, we have a problem again. This time we can't open any of our files. Well, they were fully ransomed. The bad actors, since their processes didn't change and they were still doing business the same way with minimal security, bad actors got back in and cost $300,000 to decrypt the environment. And they went and accepted that proposal. Now, just to give you some numbers here, right? We're not telling this to shame this company. The moral of the story is a lot of times we don't understand the risks to our environment. We don't understand the risks to our business. And I think if we told the story today, everyone on this call would say I wouldn't fall for that, right? But there's a lot of misconceptions on where we're at with security. So hopefully we can solve a few of those today. Now, what we find out when there is a breach, this is always interesting. If we looked at a breach today or in the last 18 months, we're going to find out they're not like Drummies, that fake name of the real company, that we fixed before, but they have pretty decent security. A lot of times they'll have general endpoint detection and response, which is our endpoint protection solution, right? Make sure it's our laptops and desktops don't have malware, don't get ransomed, all those things. They have pretty generic or standard solutions in that. They do security awareness training. Almost everybody does that today. They even have some BCDR and some multi-factor authentication, and they still get breached. They have what we call good security for probably 2 years ago, maybe not as good as we need today, but pretty good security from 2 years ago, and they've tried to ride that for as long as they can. After a breach, they kind of jump all the way over to the other side and say, I never want this to happen again, ever. So give me every piece of technology that I can use to protect, keep data in my organization and make sure it's safe. So they go to managed solutions, which does make a lot of sense, but they add a lot of different technologies, data loss prevention, zero trust, and just try to complete that security environment. And if we look at where most businesses need to be, most need to be somewhere between that left column and that right column. And if we'd start there, we'd be in pretty good shape to avoid the breach to begin with. And again, please jump in and ask questions at any time. So we'd love to get into this a little further. Now, when we think about these attacks, especially going into 2025, we're already into 2025, but for the rest of the year, when we think about bad actors, most of us think it's somebody in a basement, right, hacking away on a computer, attacking specifically Mike or myself or Sarah, trying to get your individual information. But the reality of the situation is these are businesses. These are organizations that have recruiting firms, they have bonus structures, they have hundreds of employees, and they are extremely effective at scaling attacks. And what we mean by that is if they find something that is vulnerable to a handful of people, the likelihood is that it will be vulnerable to a lot of people. So they'll shift their assets to that attack. I mean, leveraging heavily in the AI world and try to see how many companies they can exploit with it. Now, this type of attack, this external attacks, represents around 65% of incidents and breaches. Now, the remaining part of that is internal incidents and breaches, meaning I have a malicious insider employee, I have a complacent or a negligent employee that's kind of releasing information on accident. And then there's other types of attacks, but obviously the external bad actors are the big percentages. And when we think about how they're continuing to be effective, because they'll come up with a new attack, and the good guys, like Mike and I are hoping to be, will put a solution in place to defend against it. But they're leveraging obviously more and more AI. And when we think about how they're leveraging AI, it typically falls into three different buckets. Sorry about that. They're either falling into the programming side, where they're leveraging AI for its ability to create perfect code to avoid solutions. They're doing the evasion side, where they're trying to hide from our protection solutions. As soon as we jumped on, we talked a little bit about EDR evasion, and I'll talk about that in a second. Or they're using it for the research side. The more they can know about you as an individual and people as a whole, the more they can attack and exploit those understandings. So let's get into a little bit of this. When we think about the programming side, there's a lot of ways that AI can enhance bad actor activity through programming. Everybody here has heard of malware, right? It's been around for a very long time. It's an application that comes in one way or another, whether you click on a website or somebody sends it to you or you click a link, right? And it does some sort of infection or causes an issue on your system or your network. Now, traditionally, when we look back, antivirus, EDR, endpoint detection and response, and now managed detection and response are all meant to find that and stop it from running. But AI has created this new type of malware. It's either called metamorphic or polymorphic. And the interesting part about this is every time that application executes, it completely rewrites itself. So it's a complete new program. It has no trace of the original program so that it can exploit further into the network faster and avoid additional detection. Very, very elegant way of trying to expand malware's footprint. We also have the deep fakes, and everybody's probably seen the fun ones. Arnold Schwarzenegger singing 80s songs is kind of one of my favorite, but they're becoming the vocal and the video side of that are becoming, I don't want to say it's undetectable, but we're getting very close to where we can see somebody say something and it's hard to tell if it's real or not. So the deep fakes are getting stronger and stronger from that programming side. From the evasion side, right, we have the enhancement of zero-day exploits. And if you're familiar with zero-day exploits, all that means is we've probably had a vulnerability around for a little while. It's rare that the vulnerability starts on the 0-day, but it's been then identified as a vulnerability. And that's when zero-day takes off. Now, where bad actors can leverage AI for expanding that zero-day attack is they'll have all this large repository of attack styles that they can use against a piece of equipment or software. And they'll have all of the systems out there that they want to attack. As soon as that 0-day is announced, they can launch that attack quickly. Before, it used to take more time, but they've been able to speed up their capacity and reduce the response time with AI. And then those evasion techniques. We call it blinding because a lot of these solutions can do, let's say we have an endpoint detection and response, and I'll go into what that is here in just a minute. But I have an endpoint protection system, right? My laptop or desktop. I have a software on there that's trying to find these malware instances. Well, if I don't have it properly deployed, or if it's starting to decay over time, I can deploy a solution or program that hides specifically from that EDR so it can't see it. It's really challenging. Now, last is that research side, and this is the one we get a little more nervous about. So if I think of where AI can be super impactful, but for both the good and the bad, it's going to be on research. And from the bad actor perspective, I want to know as much as I can about every potential attackee that I can find. Because I want to do things like match up email addresses with first names. I want to match up personal email addresses with business email addresses. And I want to collect as much information as I can on individual targets. Now, when I said they probably aren't targeting Mike or me or Sarah or Rebecca, at the same time, they're attacking all of us, right? So the more information that they can research and gather and aggregate, the better their attacks can be. We're getting to the point where we're also looking at sentiment analysis. Now, sentiment analysis was created for good, right? We wanted to know when we're working with our clients or our vendors, when they send an email, when they leave, fill out a questionnaire, what are they trying to tell us? Because we'll see the words on there, but obviously in an email or a note, we're not going to know the tone. Well, AI tries to read all of those and say, well, here's the position that this person is taking. They're either happy, unhappy, somewhere in between, and can try to give that sentiment. Now, bad actors can use that sentiment analysis also to try to determine when you are most vulnerable as a person or as a group. So understand that trying to pull posts and information from your social lives to try and attack you in your business life. All right. So all that bad stuff out of the way, how do we defend against this? Now, we look at tools and technology. If we go back to that before breach slide that we jumped on early, we would say, hey, on that left side, we had a lot of technology. And on the right side, after the breach, we had a lot of services. And so this is the real big difference when we talk about truly protecting in the cybersecurity world, because we need people, process, and technology. Now, the technology is all the acronyms that we talk about in the IT world, and we won't go into all those here, but I'm sure you've heard us use them. I probably used them too many times in this conversation already. But it's the software or hardware that we put in place. Now, that stuff is typically really, really great, right? It does its job. It's designed. We pick it because it's an industry leader. But if we deploy it and we don't know how to maintain it, or we don't maintain it, or we don't know how to respond to what it's telling us, we can have a real challenge on our hand. That's where that process comes in. We have to have processes that we follow to maintain the technology properly. And obviously people to execute the process to maintain the technology. So we always want to think about it in those three aspects. Now, the fun part about this is the good guys now are leveraging more and more artificial intelligence inside their technology and inside their processes as well to try to improve our protection. A couple examples, which I don't think I'll go into here, is let's use an email attack. If we looked at an email attack from 5 years ago, we would point out everything wrong with it. We'd see the bad grammar, we'd see the suspicious links, we'd see the dear customer and know it's not specifically for us, right? In today's world, I can leverage a lot of AI to make that a perfect email that looks like a business email. I can spin links up immediately or instantly that don't have any legacy risk to them. And I can use my research and analysis to match email addresses to first names to make it look much more realistic to being your specific email. So we want to do things like natural language processing. And that's in our email protection systems that says, well, was this email written by AI or was it written by Mike or Jim or a person? Is it talking like a person or is it talking like AI? And can help make that message, if it is AI written, be more suspicious or at least more risky. Just one example. Now, thinking of people, process, and technology, what are we looking for from the people side? First things first, whether you're outsourcing your IT services to a managed service provider like Apex, or whether you have an internal team, or whether you use somebody else, we want to make sure they have kind of three common skill sets. First is cybersecurity. We have to understand the threats of today so we can protect against the threats of today. Just too many companies don't have an understanding of their individual risks, right? The risks that they have and haven't accepted those risks if they don't have the technology in place. We have to understand how to talk about that. Next is data protection. And we used to call this BCDR a backup, right? But in today's world, most of us are hybrid, meaning we might have some servers or some systems on premise, but we also likely have some solutions in the cloud, whether it's Microsoft 365 for our email and file sharing and Teams, maybe a financial application, maybe even electronic medical records or something like that. We have to understand how all of that data is protected so that if we ever needed to recover it, whether again it's the vendor or us doing it, we understand the time gaps and the challenges with that. Too often we only focus on data we can put our arms around and don't think about all that other data. So we have to have an understanding of it across the board. And last is this AI side of things. Everybody's probably sick of hearing about it all the time, but at the end of the day, businesses are going to use AI whether they want to or not. Now, the direct use, I jump into ChatGPT, I jump into Microsoft Copilot, and I have it help me create and research and analyze information. But then there's also all the other applications that are using on the back end that we don't know about. Our financial applications, our electronic medical records, even our Microsoft 365 and Copilot. So understanding how it's implemented, how we're using it, and what those risks are super important in today's world. And then there's the process side. My favorite slide. Nobody ever probably remembers this one, but when we talk about people, process, and technology, process is all about that Microsoft or that internal IT world, right? We always want to write ways to do things so that we make sure it's repeatable. And it's typically going to fall into one of five buckets. We're either trying to identify, protect, detect, respond, or recover to incidents, right? Identifying is pretty easy. We want to find things out there. And hopefully everything we find is supposed to be there. If we find stuff that's not supposed to be there, we get it out, right? We want to protect those devices as well. And depending on the type of device, we might use different protection solutions in place to do that. Obviously, we want to detect when those things have a problem. We want to respond to them so we can contain it. And then we want to recover it if there's ever an issue. And this is going to look a couple different ways. And I won't go through all of these, but the assessment side of things, which you probably hear a lot about from the IT world, we want to assess to find out what's out there. When we implement software, we want to monitor things. That respond and recover, though, is a point that I was going to spend just 10 seconds on. Because a lot of times these get blurred together. We have an issue. We may think we have a breach or an incident going on in our organization. So we instantly reboot, we instantly start restoring things, and we delete all that or just destroy all that forensic evidence. So we want to make sure anytime we think we have an issue that we're preserving that information so we can prove what happened. If it was an incident or if it was a breach, we need to know so we can respond accordingly. That leads us to the technology. Now, this is a technology stack, which all that means is we use multiple pieces of software or hardware to protect an organization. And where one may be a little weak, we put something in that's going to be strong so that we can defend all the way through. Call it a mesh, call it a lot of different ways to refer to a stack. But at the end of the day, we're trying to do three things, right? And again, I should have started off with this. This isn't going to be anyone's specific stack, right? This may work for you, but at the end of the day, you really have to understand your organization, your type of data, how you work, your tolerance for risk, lots of different things to make sure you design the right stack. But we're trying to do one of three things, or I guess three things in total. Trying to defend from those external attacks. So we have outer defense. We're trying to keep data whole and inside the organization, so the inner defense. And then if something does happen, we need to be able to recover. And we want to think about it in these three ways anytime we're putting a solution in place, because some of them will overlap, which is great. If we look at endpoint protection as an example, which we'll talk about in just a second, its primary job is to defend the outside, but it also can help us with internal malicious bad actors because it's going to see information trying to go to or from the computer itself or the endpoint. So they can kind of overlap at times, but we want to think about it in these three terms. It helps us decide if we have enough solution in place to protect against the specific risks that we have. So first things first, endpoint protection. Now, we talked a little bit about the evolution of endpoint protection. If we were talking, 10 years ago, we likely would have been talking about antivirus. Now, antivirus was a great solution when the first malware or programming attacks came out. Antivirus was great for us. What would happen is I, as a bad actor, would release a malware attack, and it would start infecting machines. And eventually we would figure out that this malware was infecting machines, and we would write code to stop it. That specific file, right? It had a signature to it. And then we would map that signature to every system that had our software and defend against it holistically. Well, that was great for a period of time. If it could identify it, it would block it. Now, bad actors are like, well, fine, I'll just change that signature every single time this program launches, kind of similar to what they're doing today, and the antivirus won't be able to stop it. So we had to move quickly forward to endpoint detection and response, which is that middle bucket. Now that's been a great solution for us for a long time. It stops known and unknown styles of attacks, but it's just the software. So if we're really going to look at people, process, and technology, managed detection and response is our minimum standard today. Now, what this does is it takes that endpoint detection technology and makes sure the process and people are in place to keep it current and know how to respond when there's issues. The most important part about it, if we're going to avoid EDR, endpoint detection and response, becoming blind, right? We have to make sure it's deployed properly and updated when it needs to be. Oh, I should have said we also have SIM and SOC onto that, and I'll describe those acronyms here in a second. But we can layer this a little bit further by adding more visibility to the internal network, and how that looks, right? So when we say SIM and SOC, let me describe that for a second. It's security, information, and event management. If we break that term down, I'll add the second one in a second. If we break that term down, every piece of equipment we have on a network is going to try to tell us some things. It's going to alert us when it thinks there's an issue, and it's going to give us events that happen. They're not issues, they're just things that happen on the device, right? We want, so if we have each of these pieces of equipment notifying us and holding these events, one of the challenge comes into we have to make sure that they're all configured properly to notify us. And if a bad actor gets on one of them and disables the alerts or disables the events, we'll be blind from those attacks. So we want to take every piece of information that we can and send it to a central repository. This does a couple things. Number one, it allows us to correlate alerts, meaning if I have an issue or an event that happens on our security appliance or a firewall, and at the same time, I have an event that happens on one of our servers, I can correlate those together and advance the alert or make it a little more noticeable, increase the risk or the severity of the issue so I can get people to look at it right away. Independently, they might not look like much, but together they'll look like something. And this is what the SIM really does well. In addition, if we do have an issue, and we have to prove what happened. We need all those events, we need all those alerts so that we can comb through and pull the right forensic evidence out. It allows us to centralize that so bad actors cannot delete it. Oh, the SOC side of this is the Security Operations Center. So SIM itself, so I know I'm rattling off a lot of terms here. Security Information and Event Manager is just a tool, right? It's just a piece of the tool that we use in the system. We need that process and we need that people, and that's where the Security Operations Center comes in. Security Operations Center is a manned team that maintains the SIM to make sure it's operating properly and responds to it if it tells us something's wrong. An example of how this works, let's say we have a small business of 25 users, 5 servers, handful of sites, and a couple applications. I'm in this company and I log into my Microsoft 365 environment. It's going to log that event to the SIM solution, right? No big deal, not surprising at all. Say at the same time, another user or a different person logs into that same Microsoft 365 environment using my username and password from the UK. Obviously, we know that's a problem. We call that impossible travel. So the SIM is now going to notify the SOC, hey, we had impossible travel happen. Change the password, disable the account, and notify the user. Really helps increase protection and reduce the amount of time a bad actor can be in our environment. All right, kind of wrapping up the conversation a little bit, getting to data protection. We talked about this as one of the skills we want our team members to understand well. When we used to talk about this in the business continuity, disaster recovery, or backup days, we would have said, hey, we need to understand a recovery point objective and we need to understand a recovery time objective. Just how fast do we need to get your data back up and how far back do we need to go to get it recovered? Today's order, we're looking at this a little more expansively beyond just the data that we control. And we're looking at it in 3 pillars: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now, the availability piece is that recovery point and recovery time objective. How do we get your data back up? Confidentiality, we traditionally have solved with rights management, access management, and then understanding how our SaaS-based or our software as a service-based solutions are leveraging security. The integrity we haven't been talking about much, and it's time we need to start paying attention a little bit more to that, because the next wave of attacks that we see out there isn't just deleting data or encrypting it, it's changing it. So how are we going to track information through its life cycle to ensure it's still valuable or viable? And one way we can make sure that we always protect data is by understanding the 3-2-1 rule. Now, there's a few new ones coming out, a few new phrases on this, like 3-2-1-1-0. But at the end of the day, if we make sure we have 3 copies of our data on 2 different medias or platforms, with one being far away from production, plus proper configuration, we can almost always guarantee restoration. Now, that proper configuration is the biggest part of the challenge, because if we put all of our information on the same network, including our backups, it can be susceptible to ransomware or deletion. If we use immutable storage, meaning it can't be deleted, and we use proper segmentation of these environments with different accounts, we can really protect that information and make sure it's restorable. One thing that I haven't said for a while that I used to say all the time is we never want to turn over recovery of our environment to the bad actors, right? We want to make sure that we're always in charge of our restoration. And that's it. Would love to take some questions and talk about any risks that you see.